welcome back to Genome Design, where today we're going to take you through the process of doing one of our Stage 1 Plus tunes on this 718 2.5 litre GTS. Now let's talk about the standard car. So the 2.5 litre GTS, obviously we know there's 4 litre now available, so it can get a little bit confusing, and that's why I've got to keep saying 2.5 litre GTS. This is turbocharged. Standard from factory, they quote 360 horsepower and 310 foot-pounds of torque. Now this has got a little bit of additional hardware on it. It hasn't got a downpipe, so we won't be tuning to Stage 2. We'll be looking to do more of a Stage 1 Plus tune. So it's got the BMC filters and the Miltech exhaust. You'll just have to excuse Andy down here, my beautiful assistant, who's going to be loading it up onto the dyno whilst we're talking about the car and what we're going to do to it. So now that this car's got the filters already installed and the Miltech, I'm expecting it will make a little bit more than what it quotes from factory, but somewhere near to it. So within about 10 foot-pounds of torque, 10 horsepower, something like that. So initially what we're going to do is Andy will check over everything to make sure it's, you know, all the fluids are correct. We'll get some initial data logs, as we always do if you've seen his videos before. We'll do a shameless plug for the 2 litre one if you want to look at a 2 litre one. If you've landed here and you've got a 2 litre, we have that as well. So we'll do the initial data logs, send those to me. We'll jump onto my computer screen and we'll have a look at those, see where we think we can improve it. I'll do an initial base file, send that across to Andy, and then we'll load it all on. Do some extra dyno runs, data log the tuning file, that'll get sent to me. We'll go through all that. So we're gonna go through the whole process. But as it stands at the moment, you're now gonna get to see Andy loading it up onto our hub dyno and doing the base runs. So we've seen the car run up standard. Andy has sent me some data logs across, and behind me we have the graph. Now we're to look at the data logs, we're actually going to jump across to my laptop in just 2 seconds. So as it stands at the moment, this car is making just over 325 wheel horsepower and just over 325 foot-pounds of torque, which is more or less what I expected given the hardware that's on it. So ultimately, with a circa 10 to 12% correction factor, gives us bang on 360 horsepower, which is what they come from factory, and the torque is exactly where it's stated from factory, plus a little bit that I'd said it would do because of the hardware. So now we'll jump across to my laptop and we're going to try a new thing with where you can actually see my laptop and me at the same time. And I'm going to go through the data log from standard. Now, one thing that I will note on this car in comparison to a 2 litre, which has a really, really awful calibration from factory, this is actually pretty good. You can see it's really nice and smooth. These little dips here on a rolling road, you would not see this at all. It's only because it's on our hub dyno, which is very, very precise. But that you would never feel on the road, that little dip there. So that's absolutely perfect. So the calibration from what I can see so far on this car, in comparison to the 2 litre variants from factory, is actually really, really good. So hopefully that gives us a good starting point to work from, because we're obviously trying to turn it up. And if we've got good data from the beginning from Porsche, that means that we're able to further improve that, but we don't have to do all the tidying up that we would do on the 2 litre to get an actual smooth graph before we even start to turn things up. So we'll jump across to my laptop and have a look at the data logs. So what we've got here is the stock data logs. Now, there's various things on here. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but all these different channels here mean something. So I'm going to show you the basics very quickly, otherwise this could turn into a very, very long video. So the first thing that we want to check is the set point for the pressure up throttle. That's the boost pressure versus the actual. So the yellow line here is the set point, which actually on this car it's not great, but it's not as bad as it was on the 2 litres. And you can see as it comes up onto boost, it's asking for 0.9 of a bar, so it's not even hitting 1 bar on the stock file, and it gradually builds boost up to just over a bar at peak around 6,300, and that's why we've got a nice smooth graph on the torque side and the power side. You can see that it's not massively overshooting its boost target. So the boost target is a pink line above, which is the put SP, which is pressure up throttle set point. So that's a boost set point. You've also got pressure in manifold set point, which we need to check as well, as you can see there, and pressure in manifold. So it does give two slightly different figures. They shouldn't be miles apart, but it will give two different figures because one's measuring at the throttle body and the other one is measuring in the manifold. So we can see that we're happy with the set points versus the actual. We've not got any massive overshoots, which as the result of that means that what we have here, let me just find the TPS actual value. So you can see it says 81, but that's because we've got a set point in the software that says 81 is actually 100%, so that's where it's set. But you can see there's no dips in this, so if it was unhappy with anything, so like a boost overshoot for example, you would see dips in this where it's closing the throttle to try and control the boost pressure. You would also see adjustments in the wastegate actuator. So the first thing it tries to do, if it overshoots the boost target a little bit, it will open the wastegate to try and bring the boost back under control. If it's going to overshoot it by too much and the wastegate control can't fix that, what it'll do then is it'll close the throttle to try and stop it from overshooting its boost target. Everything looks really healthy there. In fact, this is a lot better than what we see on the 2 litre platform, where this throttle position's all over the place, and that's why we get such a bad graph on 2 litre cars. The next thing that we need to check is the ignition timing versus whether it's pulling any ignition out, because if it's pulling ignition timing out standard, then when we want to add some, we're going to have problems because it's going to obviously want to pull it out even more. So you can see here we've got absolutely zero ignition pull, which is exactly what I would expect from a car that's only producing just under a bar of boost pressure. Anything up to, on a tune file, anything up to about 3 degrees of ignition pull is absolutely fine on the dyno. Anything more than that, we need to maybe pull back the ignition timing in the advance. When we advance the ignition timing, we advance it less if we can see ignition timing pulling more than 3 degrees out. So in this particular case on the stock file, we've got zero ignition pull, and if I just find the, where are we here? We should have ignition advance, there we are. So we've got a corrected ignition advance versus the actual. So again, at the very top here, so this is the ignition trace, so it's advancing the ignition timing all the way through, not pulling any out. We haven't got any big dips in this or anything, which is nice. And at the maximum there where it's making sort of peak, it's making up to about 27 degrees of ignition timing at the very top. So what we're going to do now is jump across into our winholes and open up the stock file, start to make adjustments, find all the limiters that are going to limit us from requesting more torque, which I'll jump on and show you a little bit of that. And then once we've done a base file, we'll send that across. If it's close enough, great. If it needs turning up, we can turn it up a little bit more. If it needs turning down, we can then turn it down. So we'll do that now, jump across to winholes, build a base file, send that across to the lads to flash and test on the dyno, and then we'll have a look at the data logs from the tune file. So we've jumped across to winholes here, which is where I'm going to be making the edits in this car. Now, I'm not going to go deep into all these limiters and things that I've already lifted here, because it would be a video of, I don't know, half an hour long at least on its own, and probably quite in depth. A lot of people don't need to see this, but essentially I've gone through and there's a lot of boost pressure tolerance limits and upper limits for MAF sensors and all sorts of things that need adjusting before we get to the nitty gritty, which is this bit here. So in this particular ECU, it works on torque request. So you can see in the standard form here, we've got 427 Newton meters. This is Newton meters, what it's basically requesting. Then there's limiters here that stop it from going beyond that. What I've done is I've added some torque request here, and how you base that, or how I base that, sorry, is based on, let's go past all this sort of stuff and take you across to the MAF tables. So MAF airflow set point, you can see at the top here we've got 600 Newton meters, 500 Newton meters, 400 Newton meters. How it works is on the previous table that I just quickly showed, when we request a certain amount of newton meters, it comes into here, and then that determines how much boost pressure it's going to make. So as you could see before, where we were at 427, that's going to sit somewhere and interpolate between these two torque request limits here. MAF airflow limits here. So you're going to make somewhere in the region of these two settings here. Now what I've done is I've added some torque request. Where we find problems is if you just add torque request and you don't adjust all the set points and the boost limits and all that sort of stuff, which is the boring stuff that you can see across the left here. There's an awful lot of adjustments. These are all different maps. It would attempt to make this boost pressure, but then you'd hit upper limits. So you need to do all the nitty gritty stuff first before we get to that. So essentially we're asking for a bit more boost pressure. The throttle was wide open anyway, and you can see that I've gone through, and where applicable based on the engine air charge, so again to do with MAF settings and air charge settings, we've gone through and we've added an additional 2.62 degrees of ignition timing, so about 2.5 degrees. In most cases, you know, depending on what model it is and how much boost you're trying to run and things like that, this is a great starting point. So usually we would adjust the boost pressure first, and then we'd begin to add some ignition timing to set it all up where it's happy. Now in this particular case, I've done loads of these cars, so I know that at 2.6 degrees of extra ignition timing and the boost pressure limits that I've set, because this ECU is shared with the 911s that I also do loads of, I know that we're going to be somewhere near to where I want to be. On top of that, there's lots and lots of other torque limits. We need to set up the lambda, so we've set the flick across. We've got lambda set points. That's the wrong one. Basic lambda set up at 1 there. That's on the standard file. So we have changed that to 0.83 for safety. I'm just going to find the absolute pressure. There we go. So this is my lambda set point here. So you can see I've started to add fuel in compared to the standard file, where in the mid-range there, where it's hardly making any boost, it's targeting lambda 1. Now that we're starting to add torque request and therefore add boost pressure, we need to add fuel as well. So the first thing we need to do now is send this base file across for a test. So this is version 1. Send this across, let the lads run it up, and also get some data logs for me, at which point I'm able to do the same process again, open the data logs, go through it, make sure that what I'm telling it to do, it's actually doing. Now we've seen the car run up with the Stage 1 Plus tune on that you've seen me produce on the laptop. Behind me are the figures. We'll very quickly touch on these, and then we'll jump back to the laptop to have a look at the data logs from the tune file. Solid line is our tuned file. The blue line is the power at the wheels now. And the green/yellow line is the torque figure. So we've gone from just over 325 foot-pounds of torque up to 402 foot-pounds of torque, so it's a massive jump there. All the way through the rev range, you can see we've picked up a considerable amount of torque, on average about 50 foot-pounds throughout the whole rev range. Same sort of story for your power, so the power is now up at just over 400, so depending on which run we look at, it's between 400 and 410 at the wheels, so we're talking 440 to 450 horsepower at the engine, with a similar correction factor that we've used from stock to give us the wheel horsepower to the engine figure on the stock tune. So again, somewhere in the region of about 40 wheel horsepower all the way through the rev range, and then right up at the top here you can see it's gained the best part of 70, 80 wheel horsepower there. Furthermore to that, we've added a little bit of, we've allowed it to run out for another 200 RPM because they're always a little bit conservative from factory. So, with that in mind, what we need to do now is check the logs to make sure that it's not pulling out loads of ignition timing, that it's happy with the boost control, everything looks nice. So let's jump across to the laptop again and go through that now. So, same again, now that we've seen the car run up on the dyno, what we need to check is that the changes that we've made have come into play. So first thing we need to check is the boost pressure lifted as I've expected from asking for more torque, and it has indeed. We're nearly at 1.2 bar, just below 1.2 bar in the pressure up throttle, so that's at the throttle body, and in the manifold, same again, we're at just 1.1 bar, just over 1.1 bar. So we've lifted the boost pressure up by 200 millibars there, which has allowed us to make the extra torque along with some extra timing, which I'll show you in a second. And then we've got a nice gradual lift up to 1.4 bar really maximum there, 1.45. So we've lifted it up 400, just about 400 millibars in the top end up here. So we've asked for a little bit more everywhere. That's not a colossal amount to say what power we've managed to achieve and what torque we've managed to achieve. Now, the next thing we need to check, of course, is that we've not got any throttle closures anywhere, which is here. And as we can see, we've got a wide open throttle all the way through. The car's now revving out an extra 200 RPM as requested, and everything looks pretty good. The next thing that we'd check, as before, is the knock control. So I'm expecting, I've not adjusted the knock control here, so I am expecting a little bit of ignition pull, but it shouldn't be anything more than sort of -3. We've got 3.75 there. I'm happy with that on cylinder 2. On the road, we won't see that. It's mainly down to airflow and back pressure. And as soon as you come, this is the early onset of boost. So if we open up the boost pressure here, you can see where it's pulling its most is where it hits boost. You've got peak cylinder pressure, and that's where it'll pull the ignition timing out. Now, as we can see, once we get past that and the boost starts to settle in and we're past the sort of peak cylinder pressure point, so 4,300 RPM onwards, we've got absolutely no ignition pull at all. So in theory, we could actually add some more from 4,000 RPM upwards, but we don't need to achieve, we've achieved the power that we set out to achieve for this car, and we don't need to push it any further. We've got a good result there. And in terms of the ignition time in advance, we've got a good ignition time in advance, still putting in 27 degrees, even with the additional boost pressure. What we usually see is as we add boost pressure, it makes less timing, but of course what we've done is we've added some timing as well. So we've got more boost, the same amount of timing, which is essentially given us a better result. You can see there's no big dips in this either, which is again a good sign that the tune's really good. Overall, I'm happy with that. There's a lot of other things that I'm now going to check to do with fueling and temperatures on the cats and all that sort of stuff, but I'm not going to go into too much detail on that because we could be here all day explaining that. If you want to see more of the in-depth stuff, or if people do want to see more of the in-depth stuff, either email us or just comment saying we want to see more, and then I can do a more in-depth video afterwards. So overall, I'm happy with that. Andy can take the car off the dyno and we'll now take it out on the road and test it. Do the same thing again. Data logs on the road always produce a slightly different result, so it's interesting to get those as well. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed everything. I've not gone too deep on the old technical stuff. As I said before, if you do want to see more technical things, I'm quite happy to do it, but it's not for everybody. It can get a little bit tedious and a little bit boring. But if there's any information that you feel like I've missed or you want to know more, either comment below. Any shares, any likes and subscribes are really helpful. It'll help us to keep doing these videos. So please feel free to reach out to me or one of the team and we'll talk to you about your project.